If you want to know the moment my life cracked straight down the middle, it wasn't a screaming fight or a confession or a dramatic affair caught in real time. It was an email. A single polite, professionally punctuated email sent at 6:12 in the morning on a cold Monday in late February. And it changed everything. My name is Lauren Caldwell, and at that time I was 32, a senior logistics coordinator at a mid-sized distribution company outside Flagstaff. I'd been with the firm almost 8 years, knew every loading dock by heart, every forklift operator by nickname, and every shortcut through the concrete maze of pallets and paperwork that kept the place running. My life was stable, predictable, sometimes exhausting, but it was mine. Or so I thought. When my phone buzzed that Monday, I was still half asleep, curled under my mismatched quilt, listening to the radiator hiss. I reached for the device without thinking. I expected a weather alert or a work update, not a bomb. The email subject line was short: Caldwell Family Trust, immediate action required. I sat up so fast my head spun. I hadn't heard from my father's lawyer since the funeral nearly 2 years earlier. We hadn't spoken much even then. My family had always been complicated, to put it mildly. My father passed unexpectedly from a heart episode, and the estate had gone straight to my older sister Melissa because she was the golden child, the responsible one, the one who stayed in Phoenix while I moved 3 hours north and made a quiet life on my own. I opened the email. Dear Ms. Caldwell, this is to inform you that amendments have been filed to the Caldwell Family Trust. Your presence is required at a mandatory review scheduled for Thursday at 11 o'clock in the morning. Failure to appear will result in legal forfeiture of any claims. Regards, Philip Brewer-esque. My heart thudded so loudly it drowned out the radiator. Amendments mandatory review forfeiture. I read it twice, then a third time, feeling the familiar heat creep up my neck, a mix of confusion and dread that I had grown up with. Because whenever my family reached out, it meant something was wrong. Something was being taken. Something was being rearranged while I wasn't looking. Immediately I texted Melissa. Me. Did you know about this trust meeting, Melissa? Good morning to you too, Melissa. And yes, me. Why didn't anyone tell me, Melissa? Because there was nothing to tell until now. Don't make this dramatic. That was rich, coming from the woman who once cried for 40 minutes because our mother forgot to iron her graduation gown. Me, what's the amendment, Melissa? You'll hear on Thursday. Don't harass me. Harass two questions was harassment classic. I set the phone down and pressed both hands to my face. There was only one reason the lawyer would drag me into something my sister had always controlled: someone wanted something from me. And in my family, wanting always came with taking. I showered, dressed for work, and tried not to spiral. But while I stood in front of the mirror, blow-drying my hair, replaying the exact clinical tone of that email, a single cold thought began to crystallize. Melissa knew something. She'd known for a while. And whatever this amendment was, it wasn't going to benefit me. I swallowed hard, grabbed my keys, and headed to my truck. But even then, standing in the parking lot, breathing in the diesel-heavy morning air, I had no idea just how deep the betrayal ran. No idea that this email was the beginning of a long unraveling. No idea that before the year was over, I would confront not just my sister, but every lie my family had ever told about who I was, what I deserved, and what they thought they could take from me. I didn't know then that revenge was already building inside me in small, quiet pieces. But I would, and not gently. On Thursday, I drove 3 hours straight, arriving in Phoenix just before 11. The law office was tucked inside a polished building with brushed steel doors and a receptionist who spoke in a whisper like the walls had microphones. I sat in the conference room where sunlight spilled across the mahogany table. My stomach twisted as if it already knew the verdict. Melissa walked in first. Perfect hair, perfect blazer, perfect expression of polite irritation, like this entire meeting was an inconvenience to her personally. She didn't hug me. She didn't even sit next to me. She took the far chair, crossed her legs, and pulled out her planner, the same brand she'd used since college, color-coded tabs and all. Then came our mother. She moved slowly now, her once commanding posture softened by age and grief. She took the seat closest to Melissa, not me, and didn't look in my direction. Not at first. Not even when I said hello. My stomach tightened. Then the lawyer, Philip Brewer, entered with a thick folder under his arm. He sat, clasped his hands, and spoke like someone delivering unwelcome medical news. Thank you all for coming. I'll get straight to the point. An amendment has been added to the Caldwell Family Trust. This amendment pertains to asset distribution, specifically the ownership of the Caldwell family cabin in Prescott, as well as the associated land rights. My heart lurched. The cabin. The cabin was everything. Not fancy, not luxurious. Just a weathered wooden place nestled between towering pines with creaky floors and mismatched furniture. My father and I used to spend entire weekends there when I was little, campfires fishing cheap hot dogs, laughter. He and I were always close in those days, before things shifted, before Melissa grew into the favored daughter, and I became the one who left. The cabin was the last piece of my father I felt connected to. Philip continued, "As of this amendment, full ownership of the cabin will transfer to Melissa Caldwell." A cold wave swept through me. "What?" I whispered. Melissa didn't look at me. She straightened her blazer. Philip flipped a page. "Your father's original intent was for both daughters to inherit the cabin jointly. However, your mother has submitted a petition indicating that joint ownership has become impractical and emotionally detrimental to the family's long-term harmony." My mouth went dry. Emotionally detrimental. That was their justification for cutting me out. I turned to my mother. "You filed this." Finally, she looked at me, her expression a careful blend of guilt and stubbornness. "It's for the best, Lauren." "For the best," my voice cracked. "Dad wanted us to share it." "Your father isn't here," she said sharply. "And Melissa is the one who stayed close. She's the one who manages the family affairs. She understands the responsibilities that come with the property." I blinked. "This is unbelievable." Philip cleared his throat. "To proceed legally, Lauren, we need your signature on the disclaimer. It states you relinquish your rights to the property. Without your signature, probate intervention could extend for months, possibly years." Melissa finally spoke, her tone dripping with condescension. "Lauren, don't make this difficult. You live 3 hours away. You barely visit. What's the point of you holding on to something you don't use?" My hands trembled. "I didn't use it," I said slowly, "because you changed the lock codes 2 years ago and never gave me the new ones." Melissa looked unbothered. "We didn't think you were interested." "No, they didn't think I would fight back." The betrayal hit me with full force, not sudden but deep, like a bruise blooming beneath skin. I had been erased. Again. Philip slid the papers toward me. "This is just a formality," he said gently. "Sign here." I stared at the line. Sign here. Sign away my last connection to my father. Sign away every memory we made in that cabin. Sign away my inheritance because my mother decided I no longer belonged. I pushed the papers back. "No." Philip blinked. "Pardon?" "No," I repeated louder. "I'm not signing anything today." Melissa let out a small, irritated exhale. Lauren stopped being dramatic. "This is a simple transfer." "No," I said again. "It's theft." My mother's face tightened. "Watch your tone." "I am watching it," I said calmly. "Trust me, if I weren't, you'd know." Philip adjusted his glasses nervously. "We can schedule another meeting." "There won't be another meeting," I cut in. "Not until I get a full audit of the trust, the property valuations, and the entire amendment process." Melissa scoffed. "You can't request that. You're not the trustee." "No," I said evenly, "but I am a beneficiary, and I have every legal right to review anything that affects my inheritance." Silence fell across the room. My sister's eyes narrowed, calculating for the first time. My mother's lips pressed into a thin, disapproving line. And inside me, something fierce and unfamiliar ignited. For years, I'd been the quiet one. The one who left. The one who didn't fight. The one who accepted whatever scraps my family fed me. Not anymore. Whatever game they were playing, they expected me to fold. But I wasn't folding. Not this time. Not ever again. This was the moment the entire dynamic of my family shifted. Because they had no idea I was about to peel back every secret they'd spent decades burying. And they had no idea that when they tried to steal from me, they taught me exactly how to take everything back. After I left the law office, my head was a tornado of thoughts and quietly boiling plans. Melissa waved me off with that small, satisfied smile people give when they believe a problem has been neatly solved. My mother walked out with her purse hugged to her chest like a talisman. Philip Brewer's polite goodbye clicked in my ears as if it were the final curtain being drawn on something that had been mine. I drove home slowly, not because the road required it, but because I needed time to think. The high desert air felt thin and clear like a promise I couldn't yet trust. My truck's radio played some soft, familiar country song that used to remind me of childhood summers instead of corporate machinations. I clutched the steering wheel until my knuckles went white, and then I did the only thing that made sense. I called Matt. Matt had been my friend since grade school. He sold houses now and knew more about contracts than men twice his age. He answered on the second ring, gruff and steady as always. Nat, he said, using the nickname I hated but tolerated. Need a favor, I said without preamble. Depends on the favor. Can I trust you? Always. The old line between us. I trusted him because he knew when to keep his mouth shut and when to shout. Meet me at noon, bring coffee, and whatever documents you have, I'll bring the sarcasm. At noon, I sat across from him in a little diner that smelled of grease and strong coffee. He'd grabbed a booth, rolled up his shirt sleeves, and looked at me over the rim of his mug like he already knew the story. Start from the beginning, he said. So I did. The email, the meeting, the phrase, emotionally detrimental, the demand for my signature. I watched his expression shift from curiosity to quiet anger. When I finished, he tapped his fingers against his mug. They can't do that without evidence, he said. Not legally, anyway. Your mom can file whatever she wants. But you need documents. You need proof that the trust existed in a particular state when the amendments were made, who signed on what day. And you need to catch them doing something shady. How? I asked. Matt smiled, that small, knowing grin that had gotten him out of high school detention more than once. Little things, Nat. Administrative slips that mean everything. Date stamps, unsent emails, bank transfers. People who think they can rewrite a story often forget they leave breadcrumbs. Breadcrumbs. I liked that word. It made me think of Hansel and Gretel. Only this time I wasn't lost in a forest, but walking through my family's lies with a flashlight and a plan. Matt helped me draft a polite but firm email to Philip Brewer, requesting full disclosure of the trust records and any communications related to the amendment. I sent it with my work email because it had the same domain as my job and felt official. I requested audit trails, copies of any emails between my mother and the attorney, and crucially, the exact timeline of when the amendment was proposed and signed. Then I did something else. I went through every paper I owned that might contain a clue. Old letters from my father, photographs, the cabin key that had mysteriously disappeared the year Melissa changed the locks, and a shoebox of documents I'd kept because they reminded me of warmer days. It was tedious, slow, and painful, but it gave me a rhythm. It made my hands busy and my mind sharp. On my second pass through the shoebox, my thumb brushed a folded receipt with faded ink. It was dated the day before our father's funeral. An old mechanic's invoice, actually nothing to do with the trust. But the handwriting across the top was my father's "for Melissa" deposit. Then a scribbled number. Something nagged me. My father had been methodical with money. He kept ledger books. He kept receipts. I dug out one of his old ledgers from the back of a closet, the kind with a leather cover and pages yellowed at the edges. He'd always written in careful, neat print. There it was, a note that matched the scribbled deposit reference on the receipt I'd found. Why would he write a note about a deposit to Melissa on the day before his funeral? It made no sense. I photographed everything and sent it to Matt. He answered almost immediately. That's the breadcrumb, he wrote. Weird timing. Keep digging. So I did. That night I sat at my kitchen table with a stack of old bank statements spread out like a map. I cross-referenced deposits, withdrawals, wire transfers. When I found an irregularity, a transfer that didn't match any household expense, I followed it. It led to a small account in a little credit union in Prescott. A deposit matched the exact amount my father had once called seed money, the kind of thing he would use to help someone start a small business. I knew he'd intended it for both of us. But the account had been closed and the money moved to a different account under Melissa's name. I felt something cold and hard grow in my chest, certainty. They had been moving money before I even knew there was money to move. The next day I requested copies of the deeds to the cabin, the last tax filings, and any communications the family had with the county's property office. I filed formal requests through the county clerk's website and made note of the public records that were supposed to be accessible to beneficiaries. Meanwhile, Melissa called. "Are you trying to start a war?" she asked, breathless with false shock. "People will think you're vindictive." "I'm not starting anything," I said. "I'm asking questions." "You're asking the wrong questions," she said, voice tight. "This isn't about you. This is family." Family had always been a loaded word in our house. For Melissa, it meant control. For me, it had meant years of being the one who left. Listen, I said, keeping my voice steady. If you're doing what I think you're doing, then we'll sort it out. But don't make threats. Threats, she echoed. You always get dramatic. You're the one making a scene. When she hung up, I realized something else had changed the stakes. This was no longer about a cabin. It was about integrity history and whether the narrative my family had crafted about who did what would hold up when facts were laid bare. I started to build a timeline, little milestones, dates spelled out, conversations I could prove, emails that could be forced into daylight with subpoenas if necessary. Every breadcrumb I found I photographed, made 2 copies of, and stored in an encrypted folder on my laptop. That weekend, I drove up to Prescott. I parked on the dirt road and walked the path to the cabin. It had been winter-worn but alive in the way old things are when they are loved. The porch sagged a little. The smoke ring from the chimney had ridges of soot. Someone had been tending the garden, someone who brought life to the place in ways I had hoped to. I stood on the porch, hand on the banister, and let the memory of my father wash over me. Him teaching me to fillet a fish poorly, his crooked smile when I'd found a salamander, his insistence that the world could be fixed with a little elbow grease and stubbornness. I pulled out my phone and dialed Matt. Found anything good? He asked. The cabin looks the same, I said, but I found more breadcrumbs, records that don't match. Someone has been rewriting the ledger. Good, he said. Rewriting suggests 2 things: either they're sloppy or they think you won't look. Which one is worse? Both, he said. But you're doing the right thing, Nat. Keep pushing. I drove back to the city that night with new energy pulsing through me. The plan was forming in pieces. Collect proof. Build the timeline. Expose the inconsistencies. Melissa would expect me to fold. She didn't know I had learned how to be deliberate. She didn't know that when a person takes from you, revenge isn't about spite. It's about reclaiming what's rightfully yours. That was the little truth that kept me awake the next few nights. Not a desire to hurt them, but a fierce refusal to be erased. A determination to make every breadcrumb count. And somewhere between one lead and the next, a new thought began to enter my head, quiet at first, and then louder. If this was going to be a war of truths, I would make sure that when the dust settled, everyone would know who had been honest and who had been a thief. I found my ally in a place you wouldn't expect: a dusty records office the size of a grocery store, half full of cardboard boxes labeled in handwriting from 100 different eras. The county clerk, a woman named Diane, had the kind of face that told you she'd seen every kind of human drama and was mildly amused by most of it. She was also the only person who could get me into records that mattered. Let me guess, she said when I told her I was looking for trust records and property amendments. Family squabble, middle-aged woman with a dramatic flair, older sibling who thinks she's the queen of the family. Middle-aged, excuse me, I said, but she was smiling. Fine, 30-ish, she corrected. What's your name? Lauren Caldwell. Lauren Caldwell, she repeated, pulling a large binder. I remember a Caldwell amendment a while back, signed fast. Fast signatures always make me suspicious. People in a hurry don't usually keep good records. She led me to a back room where the air smelled like paper and commiseration. For the next few hours, she taught me how to navigate the county's databases and how to read the tiny marks that mean a document was backdated or rushed or edited after the fact. Look at this, she said, pointing to a faded stamp. See that it's a second stamp. That wasn't original. Whoever handled this wanted to make sure it looked timely. Why would someone second stamp a trust amendment unless they were covering their tracks? The more I dug, the more I felt my father's steady calm coming back to me in fragments. He had been an archivist at heart, not in profession, but in practice. He loved details. He loved ledger lines and punctual stamps and orderly things. Whoever had altered the trust had not honored that care. That told me they were not just wrong, they were sloppy. Diane pulled records that showed correspondence between Philip Brewer's office and our mother. There were gaps, weeks where emails should have existed but didn't. There were signatures that looked unnaturally similar. And there was an invoice for legal fees dated suspiciously before the amendment was filed. It's here, Diane said softly. But you'll want a lawyer if you decide to move forward. I'm not saying there's criminal activity, but there's a pattern. Pattern. The word felt like a key turning. I left that office with 6 pages of revelations and a recommendation Find a probate lawyer who actually fought for the underdog. Matt called my old friend Jenna the one who'd done pro bono work for a neighbor once. Jenna agreed to meet me that afternoon. She arrived with a brisk walk and an electric energy that set the room humming. If they tried to pull a fast one on you, we find the slip. We follow the money. We make them uncomfortable, she said. And if necessary, we drag them into court and shine a bright, uncomfortable light on everything. That's the plan, I said, and it felt good to say it. We went through the binder Diane had given me. Jenna's eyes flicked across the pages, settling on the same second stamp Diane had pointed out. This looks like a fabrication of urgency, she said. Whoever drafted this wanted to create a false sense of need. If we can show that the signature dates were altered, or that payments were moved right before an amendment, that's a big red flag. You might have a case for undue influence or even fraud. Undue influence. Fraud. These legal words had a weight that made my chest tighten, but they also had teeth measures that could bite back. We drafted a letter demanding a full forensic review of the trust documents and flagged the suspicious transfers. Jenna recommended filing for temporary relief to prevent further transfers until everything was clarified. It was aggressive, but I no longer trusted polite measures. That night, I went home and slept poorly. The future had been both stolen and reassembled in secret. The people who had done it, the ones who smiled at family breakfasts and pretended everything was normal, had the gall to think I wouldn't notice. The next morning, while sipping coffee at my kitchen table, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. It read, "Stop digging. This will only hurt you." I stared at the message and then at the string of numbers. I didn't respond. Instead, I took a screenshot and sent it to Jenna. She called within minutes. "Save it, do not interact, we'll bring it to the court. This is intimidation, it's evidence." "Who would send that?" I asked, my stomach flipping. "Melissa. My mother. Someone acting on their behalf." "Whoever it was wants you to back off," Jenna said. "That means we're getting close." We were. 2 days later, an email arrived from Philip Brewer's office, formal, polite, and terse. They wanted to mediate. They insisted on a private meeting, a chance to resolve family matters without public spectacle. The message was written in clean fonts and carefully chosen language. Jenna smiled thinly. "They want a closed room. That's always a red flag. They're hoping to control the narrative." "No," I said. "We go public, we request a full review, and if they refuse, we file." The response was almost immediate and far more urgent. Philip threatened litigation if I proceeded without following certain procedural steps. It was a legal minefield. He used terms like destabilization of family and unnecessary public harm. I could feel the pressure mounting. I thought about the email, the second stamp, the missing ledgers, the transferred funds, and the threatening text. Each one was a domino, and somewhere in the stack the truth was a pattern waiting to be revealed. I decided to do something very small and very personal. I drove back up to the cabin at dusk and sat on the porch with my father's old thermos and a flashlight. The light caught things differently at night, the chipped paint, the way the wood grain held shadows like secrets. I pulled out the ledger again and read my father's looping handwriting. He had marked a line, a note to himself, for Melissa seed money, do not touch until checked by both. For both. He had meant both. As darkness settled, I made a promise to myself out loud. For the first time, I would not let them erase my father's intentions. I would not let their neat legal language rewrite his wishes. When I walked back to my truck, the stars were bright, and the world felt for once like it had room for fairness. The revenge I had been thinking of was not a spectacle of cruelty. It was a patient reclamation. It was the slow, careful work of gathering breadcrumbs and laying them out until the pattern made sense and the truth could be seen by everyone. I locked my truck, feeling the weight of that promise settle into my bones. They had underestimated me. They didn't know that when a person decides to fight for what's right, they become as relentless as the sea. And they didn't know that the next breadcrumb I found would be the one that tipped everything. The breadcrumb that unlocked everything was stupidly ordinary. A restaurant receipt folded into the back of an old cookbook I'd taken from the cabin years ago. I almost missed it. It was the kind of thing you only notice when you're looking for patterns in the margins of life, when you've made detective work into a hobby and heartbreak into a case file. It was tucked between pages that smelled faintly of smoke. The receipt itself was crinkled, dated the week before my father's funeral. Meal for two, subtotal tax tip. A name written in a shaky hand across the top, Philip, and an account number scrawled beneath it. At first I laughed because what were the odds? Then my stomach dropped when I recognized the handwriting. It was my mother's. The curling M she always used when she was trying to be neat. The hand that had signed school permission slips, holiday checks, and now apparently a tab for a lawyer. I called Jenna. Her voice on the other end was brisk as ever. "You found something," she said without preamble. "I found a receipt," I admitted. "It ties my mother to a payment to Philip Brewer." "Keep it quiet," she said. "And get it scanned. Date stamp it. Photographs can be contested, but a documented chain of custody, that's harder to argue." By that evening, the receipt was scanned, logged, and backed up in 3 secure locations. Jenna drafted an affidavit outlining the context and attached it to our already growing case file. The receipt, maddening in its mundanity, became a sliver of evidence that connected people I'd always thought of as separate: my mother, Philip Brewer, and the sudden convenient amendment. When the forensic accountant we hired traced the account number, it didn't go where Melissa claimed her funds came from. It led to a shell of accounts. Small sums moved through several institutions in a way that, to the untrained eye, looked like ordinary payments. To someone watching more closely, it read like laundering a story, pay here, shift, align, create a need, then profit from the solution. I remember the day the forensic report landed in my inbox like a weather alert. It was gray outside, a drizzle soft enough to make the windshield mist, and when I opened the report, a chill that had nothing to do with the weather went straight through me. There were layers to it. Payments made to Philip Brewer's firm from an account under an LLC name neither my mother nor Melissa used publicly, a series of transfers dated just days before the amendment was filed, and an invoice dated before the apparent request for services, an invoice that suggested premeditation. Premeditation. The word had smell and weight. I printed the report and spread it across my kitchen table like a victory banner that still felt fragile. I wasn't naive enough to think a report shifted a century of entitlement overnight. But it was data. And data doesn't have opinions. It simply shows what happened. Melissa texted that night, "Stop this. This will tear the family apart." I typed back, "The family is already torn, Mel. I'm just asking for the truth." She called, furious enough for the sound of her voice to crack the line. "You're going to ruin Mom," she hissed. "Do you realize what you're doing? People will never trust us again." "I realize what you did," I said. "I realize you moved money. I realize you signed amendments." "You don't have proof," she said. "Proof is in the report, Mel, and in the receipt, and in the emails that weren't sent." For the first time, I heard a tremor in her voice that wasn't arrogance. "If this goes public," she said, "it will destroy everything." "Maybe that's the point," I said quietly. She hung up. The next morning, we served Philip Brewer with a formal request for a forensic audit: documents, emails, phone logs, everything. Jenna advised filing a temporary injunction to halt any further transfers and to freeze the trust assets until an independent review could be completed. It was a legal hammer that would force everyone to show their hands. When the injunction was filed, 2 things happened almost instantly. First, my name was dragged through the mud. My mother called the family group chat and painted me as an unstable, grasping daughter who'd been living too far from home to understand the nuances of managing a family property. She framed Melissa as a steward, a protector of family heritage. They had already rehearsed their narrative. Second, someone from my job texted me, "Is everything okay? There's a rumor going around." My boss later pulled me into a small, quiet office and asked if there was anything I wanted to share. I told him the bare minimum: the trust dispute, ongoing litigation, and asked him to keep it confidential. He nodded, eyes sympathetic, but I felt the air shift in the warehouse the next day. People asked fewer questions and watched me more closely. Reputation, once questioned, becomes a brittle thing that shatters easily. All the while, Melissa and my mother were trying to move forward as if nothing had happened. My mother posted a cheerful photograph of her and Melissa at a charity lunch the week after the injunction, a preemptive PR campaign in sepia tones. I swallowed bile that tasted like grief and, oddly, a small satisfaction. They were pretending they had the moral high ground. We both know how that show ends when the lights go on. The real turning point. The twist that made the story less about numbers and more about motive came when Jenna found the email thread showing the conversation between the law firm and an outside party, a property developer who had expressed interest in the parcel of land adjacent to the cabin. The developer had made an informal, gentle inquiry about whether the family was open to selling a small portion of land for a planned community expansion. The developer's email was casual, almost friendly. I could almost hear the lawnmowers in the background of that message. Then came the reply from Philip Brewer. The current disposition of the property is under amendment. Please hold offer until finalized. That line was a spotlight. Someone had put the option to sell on pause, created the appearance of conflict, and then if the amendment passed, would strip the rights from one beneficiary. If the developer's offer came after the amendment, that would have made a tidy profit for anyone controlling the sale. Motive at last. When Jenna and the forensic accountant mapped the timeline against the developer's email and the transfers, the picture was ugly and precise. Conversations with the developer began weeks before the amendment. The transfers to the law firm preceded the amendment filing, and the developer's formal offer was initiated only once the amendment was publicly recorded. They had tried to manufacture a need-pocket legal fees, and then potentially sell the land perhaps to Melissa's direct benefit, or for a profit that helped settle other obligations. It was a familiar sort of betrayal, family favoring family, but with a business angle that smelled like greed. Anger rose in me like a physical thing. Betrayal is always personal, but greed has a corporate stench that sticks. This was both. Family drama and family business tangled and sticky with injustice in the middle. We brought the developer's correspondence to the court. The judge, a woman with a reputation for cutting through family melodrama with surgical precision, looked at the timeline, the transfers, the receipt, and then at Melissa, who had expected sympathy, not scrutiny. When asked under oath why the amendment was pushed through while conversations with developers were ongoing, Melissa's answers were clipped evasive. My mother's face remained a mask of cultivated bewilderment. Philip Brewer provided statements that attempted to separate representation from motive, but a pattern is a stubborn thing. Once it's visible, you can't unsee it. The temporary injunction held. The assets stayed frozen, but the public court hearing put a harsh light on things that had been quietly shifting in my family for years. The hearing also changed the social calculus at home. Friends took stances, cousins sided silently, and neighbors who'd once attended barbecues at the cabin now asked pointed questions about what happened. Most importantly, the hearing gave me a kind of moral legitimacy I had not felt in years. There is a specific justice in seeing the truth acknowledged in a public forum under oath with penalties for deceit. It doesn't fix everything. It doesn't return late nights or childhood memories. But it makes the story harder to rewrite. When I left the courthouse that day, reporters asked for comment and I declined. I walked to my truck phone buzzing with 100 half-sympathetic texts. I breathed in the city air and felt for the first time in months a sliver of forward motion. Something else happened on my drive home. My father's old ledger. Yes, the one sitting in my trunk felt heavier, as if the pages themselves had absorbed decades of expectation. I opened it and read his note again, for both. Do not touch until checked by both. I repeated the words aloud like a promise. I had not set out for revenge because I wanted to hurt anyone, at least not at first. I wanted fairness. I wanted inheritance to mean what it said. But as the hearings mounted and the patterns became undeniable, I understood revenge as something else, a restoration. Tables turned injustice named karma, catching up not in the celestial sense but in the practical one, where accounts are balanced and lies are recorded in court. I slept that night with a sense of brittle hope. The legal machinery could be slow and families are stubborn, but the breadcrumb trail had become a road, and roads once paved led somewhere. The public hearing was scheduled for a gray Tuesday that smelled faintly of rain. The courthouse felt larger than usual, the marble floors echoing with suits and whispers. My aunt sat in the back row with her knitting basket, fingers steady as ever, pretending not to pay attention, but always listening. Melissa arrived with an entourage, my mother's hand on her arm, Philip Brewer composed and prim, and a man from the developer's firm I'd never seen before, all smiles and rehearsed sympathy. I wore my father's old coat, the one he used on cold mornings when we'd go to the lake. It was heavy and smelled faintly of cedar. I liked the thought of carrying him in something tangible when the day felt like it would demand a spine of steel. Jenna stood by my side, clipboard in hand, ready for every procedural moment. She had the look of someone about to go into battle and a confidence that made the chairs across from us look shakier. The hearing began with a standard recitation. Parties present matters at hand, temporary injunction reaffirmation. Then came the heart of the matter, the proposed amendment to the Caldwell Family Trust, and the allegations of undue influence and fraudulent conveyance. Philip Brewer's calm was a practiced thing. He answered questions with legal precision, the sort that puts a measured distance between the speaker and any emotional reality. My client's decisions were made in good faith, he intoned. All formalities were observed. Formalities can be obeyed and still be abusive. The judge, a woman with soft iron eyes, tapped her pen and looked at the paper before her and then at me. "Miss Caldwell," she said, "we have evidence of irregular transfers to your attorney's firm and correspondence with a third-party developer predating the amendment. How do you respond?" Jenna stood first. She laid out the forensic timeline dates, transfers, the receipt, the developer's email, and then she handed the judge a binder that contained every breadcrumb we had collected. The courtroom was silent enough to hear the pages rustle. "Your Honor," Jenna said clearly, "the pattern suggests undue influence. The transfers facilitated legal action designed to exclude a beneficiary who stood to inherit. We request a full inquiry, forensic analysis, and a temporary halt to any attempted disposition of the land." The judge listened, her eyes thoughtful. Then she turned to Melissa and my mother. "Why did you seek an amendment at this time?" she asked. My mother answered first, voice wavering but practiced. "We believed this would protect the property, Your Honor. Circumstances changed." "Circumstances?" the judge echoed. "Which circumstances?" Melissa's answer came with the kind of breathless cadence she always used when telling a story she expected everyone to accept. "We were trying to simplify ownership. The maintenance costs were rising. We believed joint ownership was impractical." "Is that why funds were transferred to council prior to the amendment?" the judge asked, watching Philip closely. "Those were retainer fees," Philip said, voice smooth, "paid in anticipation of legal guidance. My firm was engaged to ensure the family's wishes were upheld." "Anticipation in what sense?" the judge asked. "Were you in communication with third parties about potential sale or development of the property?" Philip's composed veneer showed a hairline of strain. "There were initial inquiries from an interested party," he admitted, "but no formal offer at the time. Any discussions were preliminary." "Preliminary," the judge repeated slowly. "And how many days passed between those preliminary discussions and the filing of the amendment?" Philip glanced at his notes. "A matter of weeks." Weeks that, coinciding with transfers and a lack of full disclosure, made a chain that was beginning to look purposeful. The judge's pen tapped the paper again. "Miss Caldwell," she said, turning to me, "your counsel presented evidence. Do you have anything to add?" My voice felt steady. "I told the court what I had told Jenna about the cabin, about my father's intention for both daughters to share it, and about the receipt found in my father's old cookbook. I described the ledger note for both, and read it aloud so everyone could hear my father's hands speak from beyond." The judge's expression softened at that moment, and I felt a small private victory. Sometimes truth is quieter than you think. It slips in on paper and sits beside a person who remembers how to read it. By the time witnesses were called, the mood in the room had shifted. The developer's representative testified that their interest had been dormant until the amendment was recorded, and that contact had intensified afterward. The forensic accountant explained transfer timing and said sentences I'd memorized from my own sleepless nights. Patterns like this suggest planning prior to formal action. When Melissa answered questions on the stand, she presented the same composure she'd always cultivated, small smiles, measured pauses. But under oath the cracks showed. Her explanations felt too neat. She said she was protecting the family. She used the word stewardship a lot. "Stewardship," the judge repeated later when Melissa had left the stand and the public gallery murmured. "Stewardship does not include stealth. The hearing ended with the judge extending the injunction and ordering a full accounting. She also suggested mediation to address family tensions, though her tone implied skepticism. Mediation is easier when all parties come to the table honestly. As I walked out of the courtroom, cameras flashing at the entrance, a small knot of photographers pressing lenses toward anyone who would speak, I felt a curious combination of exhaustion and calm. The hearing had brought the facts into the light. That was victory enough for one day. But truth, even when acknowledged, has costs. Melissa called my mother that evening, and then surprisingly called me as well. Her voice when she spoke was rawer than I had heard it in months. "They're going to hate us," she said. "They already do. People will say we ruined the family." "What you did will get judged," I said. "Not if I did something wrong, but what you did. There's a difference." "I thought you'd understand," she whispered. "I thought you'd forgive." "Forgiveness isn't a currency you spend when you want to buy reputation back," I said. "You sold a piece of our family. We didn't reconcile. Not then." But the tension in her voice suggested she too had been surprised by the backlash. People are complicated creatures. Even those who do the most harm can feel the sting of consequence. The weeks that followed were a blur of depositions, subpoenas, and reporters. My boss at work pulled me aside to offer support publicly, but privately admitted the company was worried about optics. It was a strange world where professional competence could be overshadowed by family scandal. Yet within that blur, the ledger in my trunk felt steadier than ever, a relic of my father's intentions and a talisman I guarded carefully. Sometimes revenge is the simplest thing. Collect the truth, document it, and give it a place where lies cannot stand. Justice, in the slow way the world sometimes provides, it is often not dramatic. It creeps up in pages and signatures and the dull, relentless work of following leads. It doesn't feel like poetry. It feels like paperwork. That said, the courtroom revealed another truth that would ripple beyond our family when people in positions of trust prioritize profit over integrity. They make enemies of those they underestimated. Friends rallied, neighbors took sides, and a few cousins I hadn't spoken to in years reached out with quiet support. Even Aiden Miles' younger brother from a different story later told me in a message that sometimes family chooses the wrong battles. I wasn't naive enough to think alliances would all be permanent. People choose what suits them. But as I sat on the porch of the cabin that night, listening to the wind move through the pines, I realized the cost of truth was not only legal, it was personal. It meant watching faces at the next holiday dinner that had once been comfortable now be brittle and measured. It meant people whispering in corners and glances that held centuries of judgment. It meant confronting not just greed but pride. I thought of my father's handwriting again, for both, and I felt an ache that softened into resolve. The hearing had been a turning point. It had forced the family's secrets into daylight. It had made mistakes visible and named. But this was not a story with a single courtroom chapter and an immediate end. It was long-threaded and messy. And in the quiet after the hearing, I understood that the hardest part of reclaiming what was mine would not be the legal battles ahead, but holding on to the person I wanted to be through them all. 3 days after the hearing, while I was elbow-deep in shipping reports at work, my phone buzzed with an email notification. I wiped grease and dust off my hands before opening it. The subject line hit like a slap. Preliminary purchase proposal, Caldwell Cabin property. The sender was the same developer who had quietly circled the property for months. Their message was polite, professional, and smug in the way people get when they assume they're dealing with someone powerless. Dear Ms. Caldwell, we understand there has been confusion regarding ownership transfer. In light of recent developments, we are extending a courtesy offer to purchase the cabin at fair market value. We believe this solution will prevent further conflict and protect your family's legacy. Warm regards, Shoreline Mountain Development. Fair market value, courtesy offer, protect your family's legacy. I almost laughed. My family had spent months trying to erase me, and now a corporate developer wanted to protect what they believed I couldn't defend. I forwarded the email to Jenna. Her response came 30 seconds later. Do not reply. Want me to have fun with this? I called her immediately. They think they can play hero, I said, like selling the land will solve the lawsuit. That email is manipulation wrapped in kindness. Jenna said. They're panicking because the injunction froze their plans. Also look at the phrasing. Someone fed them inside info. Someone like my sister, I said. Or your mother, Jenna added. Someone who believed you'd fold. They're treating you like a loose thread to be clipped cleanly. Guess I'll be the thread that unravels the sweater, I said. Exactly. Later that night, after a long shift at the warehouse, I drove up to the cabin to clear my head. Snow clung to the branches, and the sky had that pale winter glow that makes everything look nostalgic. I stood on the porch and let the cold seep into my bones, the way truth had been seeping into my life, slow, relentless, clarifying. This wasn't just about property anymore. It wasn't even just about betrayal. This was about identity. I had spent years believing I wasn't the daughter who fought, the daughter who stayed, the daughter who won. I'd accepted the narrative my family handed me, quiet, distant, uninvolved. But now I had evidence, allies, a judge who wasn't fooled, and a breadcrumb trail that led directly to the truth they never wanted uncovered. And I had something more powerful than all of it, the memory of my father teaching me how to hold a fishing rod. Don't rush, he had said, guiding my 9-year-old hands. Still waters show everything. Standing there in the cold, watching frost gather on the windows, I finally understood what he meant. Stillness isn't weakness, it's clarity. When I returned to town, Jenna called me with another twist. Lauren, she said, I think you should sit down. My heart thudded. What now? You know how we subpoenaed the full digital communications from Brewer's office? Yeah, well, she said, voice tightening. The IT team found deleted messages between Brewer and your mother. Deleted, I whispered. Deleted, she confirmed. Conversations about pushing the amendment through before you could object. Conversations suggesting you were emotionally unstable and unfit to manage property. Conversations implying Melissa deserved more because she was the daughter who mattered. The room spun. My mother. She hadn't just gone along with the plan, she had engineered it. She had weaponized my distance, my independence, my quietness qualities I'd developed just to survive her constant comparison to Melissa, and used them as justification to cut me out completely. Lauren, Jenna said softly, "Are you okay?" I wasn't, not even close, because betrayals are different when they come from a parent. There's no training for it, no bracing against it. It enters through the bones, not the skin. Send everything to the judge, I said. No filters, no summaries, full transcripts. Are you sure, she asked. This will get ugly. It already is ugly, I said. At least now it'll be honest. That night, sitting alone in my condo, surrounded by stacks of reports and legal files, the weight of everything crashed over me. I tried to eat dinner. I couldn't. I tried to sleep. I couldn't. I ended up standing by the kitchen sink, staring at that damned cabin key I still kept on the hook, rusted, worn, a symbol of everything they tried to take. My phone buzzed again. A new text, from a number I didn't recognize. Calling in reinforcements won't save you. Stop before you humiliate yourself. Threat number 2. This time I didn't screenshot it first. I called Jenna immediately. Forward it to the judge's clerk, she said. This just became witness tampering. Witness tampering. The word tasted metallic, sour, final. When I finally collapsed into bed, exhaustion wrapping around me like a blanket dipped in ice water, a new realization crept into my mind. This wasn't just a family dispute anymore. It was a battlefield. And my mother and sister weren't fighting for justice or fairness. They were fighting to maintain a story where I was the outsider, the afterthought, the dispensable one. And the more they pushed, the more I understood exactly why I had to finish this fight. They needed me small, silent, cooperative. But I had spent 3 months collecting every lie they'd told. The truth was now heavier than their narrative. And the next step would force everything into the open. The day my mother showed up unannounced was the first time I'd seen her without Melissa flanking her like a personal attorney. She stood in my doorway in a wool coat, hair perfectly curled, the faintest scent of lavender clinging to her like an old memory. For a moment I was 10 again, waiting for approval that never came. "Lauren," she said gently, her voice warm in that specific curated way she reserved for church functions and charity events. "May I come in?" I stepped aside, but I didn't offer tea or coffee. I didn't soften the edges. She walked into my living room slowly, like she was entering a sacred space. Maybe she was. My life, untouched by her expectations, was holy in ways she never understood. She sat on the edge of my couch and folded her hands on her lap. "I'm here as your mother," she began in a voice too calm, not as a litigant. "That's convenient," I said, "considering the timing." She swallowed. "This lawsuit, the hearing, the injunction, It's tearing the family apart. There was no tearing until you started pulling threads, I replied. Her jaw tightened a fraction. She smoothed the fabric of her skirt. Lauren, dear, she said, you're hurting yourself. You're letting outsiders influence you. Lawyers, accountants. They're filling your head with exaggerated ideas. I stared at her, stunned by the audacity. Are you seriously suggesting I imagine the amendment? The secret payments, the deleted emails you and Philip exchanged. Her eyes flickered, barely but enough. I did what I thought it was best, she said stiffly. Best for who, I asked, because it wasn't for me. You've always been fragile, she said gently. Emotional, easily overwhelmed. Your father worried that the cabin would be too much responsibility for you. I inhaled sharply. She was rewriting the past in real time. Dad and I spent more time at that cabin than anyone else, I said. He taught me everything there, how to build a fire, sharpen a knife patch, a leak. He confided in me, she insisted. He said Melissa was the logical choice. No, I said slowly. I don't believe that. She flinched like the words stung. Silence rippled between us. Then she leaned forward, lowering her voice, adopting that sympathetic tone that had controlled every room she entered for decades. Lauren, listen to me. People already think you're unstable. The court will too. Ending this now is your best chance to salvage your reputation. I blinked, utterly still. Is that why you told Philip I was unfit? I asked, voice icy. Why you said I was emotional and unreliable? Why you wrote that I didn't matter for inheritance planning? Her face froze. Finally, her rehearsal failed. You weren't supposed to see those messages, she whispered. But I did, I said. She rose abruptly, pacing my living room with sharp-clipped steps. She wasn't here to reconcile. She was here to negotiate. Withdraw the injunction, she said. Stop the hearings. We, your sister and I, will discuss a financial compromise. A payoff, I said. A settlement, she corrected. I don't want money, I said. She turned stunned. Then what do you want? The truth. My mother stared at me like I was speaking a foreign language. I'd expected anger, or at least disdain. But when she finally spoke again, her voice cracked in a way I had not heard since my father's funeral. Your sister needs that cabin, she said. She's having difficulties, things you don't know about. She's carrying burdens you couldn't possibly understand. There it was, the guilt card, the manipulation I'd been raised on. What difficulties? I asked warily. She hesitated too long. I felt the lie forming before she spoke it. She's trying to start a family, my mother whispered. There are complications, stress. The cabin gives her peace, stability. Don't take that from her. It would have been a moving plea if it had been true. But 2 hours later, a cousin texted me screenshots of Melissa's Facebook photos, a winery trip, a beach vacation, a spa day. Not a single hint of hardship. Not one caption about struggle. Nothing but curated bliss. So my mother had lied again. She had come into my home and woven a story designed to twist my heart, just as she'd done my whole childhood. But I wasn't 10 anymore. I wasn't the girl who needed her approval. I was the woman building a case strong enough to break generational patterns. When I called Jenna to tell her what happened, she exhaled sharply. They're unraveling, she said. They're losing narrative control. I know, I said, and tomorrow they'll lose more. Are you ready for that? My father's ledger sat on the table beside me, open to his handwriting. For both. I'm ready, I said, and I'm not backing down. Because the next day the judge would review the newly discovered emails, the threatening messages, and the financial inconsistencies. And after that, depositions. Under oath. Recorded. And Melissa had never been good under pressure. Tomorrow, for the first time, she would have to answer questions without a script. And that was the moment everything would start to break open. Depositions are strange things. They feel informal, like meetings where everyone pretends they're just having a conversation, but every word is recorded. Every hesitation becomes evidence, and every lie becomes a weapon that only grows sharper under pressure. Melissa walked into the deposition room wearing a blazer so stiff it looked like it could stand on its own. Her makeup was perfect, hair sleek, posture impeccable. An image crafted for the narrative she wanted the lawyers to buy, stable, reasonable, composed. Across from her sat Jenna, cool as a windless night pen, poised, voice calm. The court reporter typed steadily, the keys clacking like a countdown clock. I sat beside Jenna, silent but steady, my father's ledger tucked inside my bag like a heartbeat. When the oath was administered, Melissa's eyes flicked toward me for the briefest second. In that micro-glance, I saw everything she was afraid of: exposure, consequence, the loss of a story she'd been telling herself for years. Ms. Caldwell, Jenna began. We're going to start with some simple questions. Melissa nodded, folding her hands neatly. Please state your name for the record. Melissa Caldwell. And your relationship to the Caldwell Family Trust. I'm the designated future trustee after my mother. The court reporter typed. The line of Melissa's jaw shifted just slightly. Jenna noticed. Of course she noticed. Melissa, Jenna said gently. The amendment that removed Lauren from cabin ownership, who initiated that? My mother, Melissa said quickly. Too quickly. And when did those discussions begin? A few weeks before the amendment was filed. Do you recall the exact date? No. Jenna slid a document across the table. According to this email thread, you and Mr. Brewer discussed finalizing the cabin transfer 2 months before the amendment. Is that correct? Melissa's throat bobbed. We were only considering options. Nothing was finalized. But you were discussing excluding Lauren. Her eyes darted downward. Silence stretched. The court reporter's keys tapped. Melissa inhaled sharply. We thought it would be less stressful for her, she said. Less stressful than inheriting what her father intended her to have, Jenna asked. The first crack appeared behind Melissa's eyes, tiny hairline but visible. She shifted in her chair. We believed she wouldn't want to manage it, she said. Did Lauren ever say that? She didn't have to. Jenna leaned back. Ah, so you decided for her. Melissa's lips pressed into a thin line. Let's move on, Jenna said, flipping to another page. Do you recognize this receipt? She handed over the restaurant slip with my mother's handwriting, Philip's name, the mysterious deposit note, the date before my father's funeral. Melissa examined it, and for the first time her posture faltered. This looks old, she said. It is, Jenna replied, and relevant. That deposit number, do you know what account it connects to? No. It links to an LLC that funded the initial retainer to Mr. Brewer. Melissa blinked. That's not illegal. No, Jenna said. But it is curious considering the LLC was formed just days after your father's hospitalization. Silence vibrated in the air like electricity. Jenna pressed forward. Melissa, were you aware of communications between your mother and Mr. Brewer where they described Lauren as, quote, emotionally unfit, unstable, and not a relevant beneficiary? A visible tremor moved through Melissa's neck. No, she whispered. Are you aware those messages were deleted and had to be recovered during discovery? Another pause, then. No. Are you aware, Jenna said, voice tightening just slightly, that such statements, if proven false, constitute undue influence and fraud in trust law? For the first time, Melissa's mask slipped. Panic flickered across her face, quick and raw. I didn't write those things, she fired back, eyes darting between us. But you benefited from them, Jenna replied. Melissa clutched the table. I didn't know about the messages. Melissa, Jenna said quietly. When did you first talk to Shoreline Mountain Development about selling the cabin land? Melissa froze. It was a small stillness, but a complete one, the kind that happens when the mind is scrambling faster than the body can follow. I didn't. Jenna slid another document forward, an email time-stamped 4 days before the amendment from a Shoreline representative to Melissa's personal email. Subject: possible interest in Prescott parcel. My breath caught. I hadn't seen this one. Melissa's face drained of color. I didn't respond to that, she said. That wasn't the question, Jenna replied. When did you first talk with them? Melissa's mouth opened, then closed. Let me remind you, Jenna said calmly, you are under oath. A beat passed, then another. Melissa's fingers curled around the edge of the table so tightly her knuckles whitened. They contacted me, she whispered finally, months before the amendment. And you didn't tell Lauren? Jenna said, not a question, a statement of fact. I didn't think she'd care, Melissa said. Or, Jenna countered, you didn't want her to know. My sister's eyes met mine, then unshielded, cornered, terrified, not of me, but of the truth she had buried, and now watched being unearthed. Jenna pressed the final blow. Melissa, did you intend to sell the cabin land after securing full ownership? Melissa flinched as if struck. I considered it. And your mother. She supported it. And Mr. Brewer. Silence. Thank you, Jenna said. No further questions for now. The deposition ended soon after, but the damage was done. Melissa left the room trembling, shielding her face from the corridor like she had suddenly become a stranger in her own life. When the door closed behind her, I exhaled a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. Jenna turned to me. Well, she said, that was the crack we needed. You think it's enough? I asked. Jenna smiled, slow, certain, razor-edged. It's not enough yet, she replied, but it will be. And my mother? I asked. Oh, sweetheart, Jenna said softly. If Melissa broke this easily, imagine what your mother will do when she's in that chair. I shivered, not from fear, but from the bone-deep knowledge that we were finally nearing the heart of the storm. Because Melissa cracked under pressure. But my mother, she would shatter. If Melissa cracked, my mother fractured like porcelain. Beautiful, polished, and brittle the moment pressure found the fault lines she'd spent a lifetime hiding. Her deposition was scheduled for 8 o'clock sharp on a Thursday morning. She arrived 10 minutes early, wearing a navy suit pearls, and that expression she'd perfected over decades, dignified suffering. The kind that manipulated rooms without a word. She sat down spine straight, hands folded, lips pressed into a serene line. To anyone else, she looked composed, but I saw the truth in the micro-tremble of her left hand. My mother had always feared public scrutiny more than wrongdoing itself. When the court reporter administered the oath, she hesitated a tiny beat too long before lifting her right hand. The room clock ticked loudly in the silence. Jenna began. "Mrs. Caldwell, thank you for being here today." My mother smiled graciously like she was attending a charity luncheon. "I'm happy to clarify any misunderstandings," she said. That was her opening move, reframing every deliberate action as a misunderstanding. Jenna nodded politely, then set the first trap. "Mrs. Caldwell, who initiated the amendment to the Caldwell Family Trust. My husband intended the cabin for Melissa," she said immediately. Jenna blinked once, a slow, unimpressed blink. "That was not my question. Who initiated the amendment paperwork?" My mother stiffened. "I consulted Mr. Brewer." "So you initiated it," Jenna said. "Correct." My mother's jaw ticked. "Yes, but only because I knew it was what my husband wanted." "Did he say that?" "He implied it." "When?" "Before he passed." "Exact words?" "He didn't use exact words." "So he never actually said it," Jenna clarified. My mother's eyes hardened. "He didn't need to. I knew him." Jenna let the silence hang like humidity before sliding a printout across the table. "Mrs. Caldwell, this is an excerpt from Mr. Caldwell's handwritten ledger. Do you recognize the writing?" "Yes." "And this note, for both, 'Do not move until reviewed by both,' is in his hand." "Yes." "Can you explain why your husband's explicit instruction contradicts your claim?" For the first time, my mother faltered. Her throat bobbed, her gaze wavered. He wrote many things," she said weakly. "But this one you ignored," Jenna replied. My mother bristled, indignation flashing across her face. "I had to make choices after he died. I couldn't keep everything as it was." "And yet," Jenna said gently, "you changed only the part that benefited your eldest daughter." My mother's lips thinned. She knew better than to answer. Jenna shifted gears. "Mrs. Caldwell, did you and Mr. Brewer discuss Lauren's emotional stability?" My mother blinked rapidly. "We discussed concerns." "What concerns?" Lauren is sensitive." "That is not a legal concern," Jenna replied. "What specific behavior led you to label her emotionally unfit?" My mother inhaled sharply, composure wobbling. "She moved away," she said. "She distanced herself from the family. She didn't attend Sunday dinners. She didn't help care for the property. She lived her own life," Jenna said. "That is not instability." My mother's voice rose. "She abandoned her responsibilities." "What responsibilities?" Jenna asked, calm and cold as winter rain. "She should have been here," my mother snapped. "And yet you never asked her to be," Jenna replied. My mother's composure shattered a little more. She gripped the chair arms, knuckles white. Jenna reached for the next document. "Mrs. Caldwell, please read the highlighted portion aloud." My mother scanned the line, her face drained of color. I don't recall writing this," she whispered. "Please read it," Jenna repeated. My mother's lips trembled as she read her own words. "Lauren does not need to be included. She is not a material beneficiary. Melissa has always been the daughter who matters." Silence detonated in the room. The court reporter's keys stopped for a moment, just a beat long enough to punctuate the gravity of those words. My mother lifted her eyes to mine then. For the first time in my entire life, she looked ashamed. Not deeply, not enough to undo decades, but enough to show that the truth she'd hidden from the world had finally undeniably been exposed. Jenna did not soften. "Mrs. Caldwell, did you believe Lauren did not matter?" My mother's voice came out small. I was emotional." During multiple emails, Jenna asked. "Across several days shared with legal counsel." My mother swallowed hard. "I didn't mean it." "Yes," Jenna said quietly, "you did." The silence that followed was not accusing, it was simply factual. My mother attempted one last pivot. "I was trying to protect the family," she whispered. "By erasing one of your daughters?" Jenna asked. "She left us!" My mother snapped, suddenly raw and unfiltered. "She made her own life. She didn't need us anymore." The words tore out of her like a confession dragged from a resistant heart. Jenna's response was surgical. "Mrs. Caldwell, is it fair to say that this amendment was motivated not by Lauren's capability, but by resentment?" My mother's eyes brimmed, not quite tears, but the ghost of them. "Yes," she whispered. That single syllable was the most honest thing she had said in 20 years. The court reporter resumed typing. Jenna leaned back satisfied. No further questions. My mother stood on unsteady legs. She tried to leave with dignity but stumbled just slightly on her way out of the room. Melissa, waiting in the hall, rushed to steady her. I didn't move, didn't speak, didn't comfort. It took every ounce of restraint I had. Jenna placed a hand on my shoulder when the door closed. You okay? She asked. Yes, I said. But that was a lie. Inside me, under the anger, under the strength, something small and old finally exhaled. A grief I'd carried since childhood realized it had been justified all along. I mattered less to my mother. She had said so, in writing, under oath. And while the truth hurt like a bruise pressed too hard, it also healed something. Because now there was no gaslighting, no confusion, no denial. I wasn't crazy, I wasn't dramatic, I wasn't imagining the distance. It was real, it had always been real. And now the court had seen it too. Jenna closed her binder. This deposition shifts everything she said. Your mother just invalidated her own amendment. Undue influence is on record. Fraud is on record. Emotional bias is on record. This case is yours to win. But winning isn't what I felt. Not yet. What I felt was the beginning of release, the 1,000-pound weight of chasing my mother's approval slipping off my shoulders at last. Soon the judge would rule. Soon the cabin, the truth, the legacy, the intention would be restored. But there was one more shock coming. One more revelation that neither Jenna nor I expected. And it would arrive in the form of a voice message that hit my phone 2 nights later, from someone I hadn't heard from in years. It was just after 9 on a quiet Saturday night. I'd finally allowed myself something that resembled peace. Soft jazz playing through my speakers, a bowl of leftover pasta, and the faint scent of cedar drifting from the candle I kept burning on my kitchen counter. For the first time in months, my hands weren't shaking. My thoughts weren't spiraling. My heart wasn't bracing for impact. Then my phone buzzed. A voicemail. From an unknown number. I almost ignored it. God knows I'd had enough of unknown numbers. But something in me hesitated. A flicker of intuition, or maybe an old instinct sharpened by months of betrayals and half-truths. I played it. A familiar male voice filled my kitchen, older now, rougher, tinged with something like grief. Lauren, it's Uncle Peter. I don't know if this is the right time, or if I have any right to contact you after all these years. But I heard about the trust, the lawsuit, your mother's deposition. He exhaled shakily. I could picture him rubbing the bridge of his nose the way he always used to when he was conflicted. There's something you need to know. Something your father told me before he passed. Something your mother didn't want you to hear. I should have told you sooner. God knows I should have, but I let her pressure me. And I'm sorry. Deeply sorry. My pulse hammered. Please, call me back. It's about the cabin, and why he insisted it stay in both your names. There was a reason, Lauren, a reason your mother has spent years hiding. The voicemail ended. My spoon clattered into the bowl. Uncle Peter, my father's closest friend since childhood. The man who used to sneak us candy during holidays when my mother was on one of her no-sugar crusades. The man who suddenly stopped coming around after my father's funeral. I always wondered why. Now I knew. My mother. I called him back immediately. He answered on the first ring. Lauren, his voice was thick with emotion. Yes, I whispered. What do you know? There was a long silence on the other end. Then, your father never intended for Melissa to inherit the cabin outright. I know, I said. I found his ledger. No, Peter said gently. You don't understand. He meant the cabin to be yours. Mostly yours. The trust paperwork listed both names only because he was trying to keep the peace with your mother. But the planned percentages, they were different. He was going to update the trust the week before he died. A cold shiver swept over me. Different how I asked. 70% to you, he said softly. 30 to Melissa. And he wanted you to have full decision-making power in the event of sale or development. My heart stilled. My father had chosen me. Not as the afterthought, not as the distant daughter, not as the one who didn't matter. As the primary heir. He told me himself, Peter continued. A few days before his hospitalization. He said you listened to him more. You understand the land. The cabin meant something sacred to you. He didn't trust Melissa with it. I couldn't breathe. Why didn't he finish the amendment? I whispered. He tried, Peter said. He started the process. He told your mother. She didn't take it well. I closed my eyes, dread curling through me. What did she do? She begged him to delay, told him it would tear the family apart, that Melissa would be devastated. She told him you were too emotional to handle the responsibility. Your father postponed the meeting. He planned to revisit it after he recovered. But he never recovered, I said hollowly. No, Peter said. And your mother used the old paperwork to justify freezing you out. Anger rose in me, slow, volcanic, inevitable. And you didn't say anything, I asked, voice cracking. I tried, he said. But your mother threatened to cut me out of the family completely. I was weak. I'm ashamed of it. But I'm telling you now because your father wanted you to have that cabin. He wanted it to be yours. My throat tightened. He told me something else, Peter added quietly. Something I think you need to hear. I gripped the phone so tightly my fingers hurt. What? He said, Lauren sees me. Melissa sees expectation. I know which daughter will honor the place. My breath hitched. He wanted you to have it, Lauren. Don't let them steal what he trusted you with. When the call ended, I sat in the dim light of my kitchen and sobbed for the father whose voice I would never hear again, and for the years I'd believed my mother's version of me. I wasn't the lesser daughter. I wasn't the problem. I wasn't the fragile one. I was the one my father chose. And my mother had buried that truth because it didn't fit her narrative. But now I had a witness, now I had motive, now I had new evidence. And now the judge would know exactly why my mother and sister had fought so hard to erase me. Not because I didn't matter, but because I mattered too much. The courtroom was packed the day the judge delivered her ruling. You could feel tension hanging in the air like humidity, dense electric waiting. My mother sat rigidly in the front row, hands clasped so tightly her knuckles looked bleached. Melissa sat beside her, her composure frayed, mascara faintly smudged beneath her eyes. Philip Brewer, more pallid than I'd ever seen him, sifted through papers he no longer had any power to weaponize. Jenna sat beside me, calm and steady, a silent wall at my back. The judge adjusted her glasses and cleared her throat. After reviewing all evidence, she began, voice firm. This court finds significant irregularities in the amendment process of the Caldwell Family Trust. My heart pounded. Furthermore, testimony established clear emotional manipulation, undue influence, and coordinated efforts to mislead both legal counsel and the surviving beneficiary. Melissa stiffened. My mother's breath hitched audibly. In addition, the court acknowledges the late Mr. Caldwell's expressed intentions as supported by documentary evidence and credible witness testimony. She meant Peter. She meant the ledger. She meant the truth. Therefore, the judge said, voice ringing with finality, the amendment excluding Ms. Lauren Caldwell is hereby declared invalid. My lungs collapsed with relief. The judge wasn't finished. Effective immediately, primary ownership of the cabin property is restored to Ms. Caldwell as the intended majority heir. Administration rights will be updated accordingly. My mother's hand flew to her mouth. Melissa's eyes widened in disbelief. But the judge continued. Additionally, this court refers the conduct of Mr. Brewer and the actions of the petitioning parties to the State Bar and the District Attorney's Office for review of potential ethical violations. Philip's folder slipped from his hands. And finally, she said, looking directly at me, the court recognizes Ms. Caldwell's persistence in safeguarding her father's wishes. This ruling reflects the restoration of those intentions. She banged the gavel. Court dismissed. The room erupted in murmurs. Jenna turned to me smiling. You did it. But I shook my head. No, I said softly. My father did. I just followed the trail he left. Behind me, Melissa burst into tears. Not the quiet kind, but sharp, gasping sobs that echoed in the chamber. She sank into her chair, shaking, murmuring, "It wasn't supposed to be like this. She wasn't supposed to win." My mother didn't cry. She simply stared at me, eyes hollow, stunned, and whispered, "You ruined us." I looked her dead in the eyes. "No," I said. "You ruined us. I just stopped letting you rewrite the story." She flinched as if struck. I walked out of the courtroom with Jenna at my side and sunlight warming my face. Outside, reporters shouted questions, but it all sounded distant, muffled, like I was underwater. The only thing I truly heard was my father's voice from all those years ago, soft, warm, steady. Still waters show everything. And they had. Later that week, I drove to the cabin alone. The sky was a brilliant blue, the pines swaying in a slow, steady rhythm. I unlocked the door the lock Melissa installed had been legally changed back and stepped inside. It smelled exactly as I remembered, pinewood dust and something like safety. I walked to the kitchen, pulled out my father's ledger, and placed it on the table. My hands hovered over his handwriting. For both, but mostly for you. At least now I knew. That night, sitting on the porch as the sun dipped behind the trees, I recorded the final lines of the story for my viewers. Women my mother's age, women who had fought their own battles for fairness, women who needed to hear what I'd finally learned. Sometimes revenge isn't fire, it's not fury, it's not destruction. Sometimes revenge is simply restoring what should never have been taken. Sometimes revenge is truth. Sometimes revenge is inheritance of the right kind. And sometimes the deepest revenge is becoming the woman they tried so hard to convince you that you weren't. I exhaled into the quiet. And if this helped you even a little, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. We tell stories here, but more importantly, we reclaim them.